Grease. That was the only thing I could smell. It coated the back of my throat, clung to my hair, and had seemingly seeped into the very pores of my skin. It was the scent of 12 hours spent scraping leftovers off chipped ceramic plates and dodging the wandering hands of drunk patrons who thought a $2 tip bought them the right to touch my waist. "You're moving like a snail, Wells," Stan barked from the pass-through window, his face glistening with sweat and malice. "Table 4 has been waiting for their check for 3 minutes. Do you want to be here all night?" I didn't answer. I just gritted my teeth, grabbed the receipt, and forced a polite expression onto my face as I walked over to the booth. My legs felt heavy, like they were filled with lead shot, but I refused to limp. Showing weakness in front of Stan was like bleeding in a shark tank. "Here you go, sir. Whenever you're ready," I said, placing the slip of paper down. The man didn't look up from his phone. He just waved a hand dismissively. I walked away, the phantom sensation of the grease trap I'd cleaned earlier still haunting my nose. I needed to get out of here. I needed fresh air. I needed to go home, open my laptop, and lose myself in the digital lectures on art history that were the only bright spot in my grim reality. 10 minutes later, I was pushing through the heavy glass door, the bell jingling a mocking farewell behind me. The Chicago wind hit me like a physical blow to the chest. It wasn't just cold, it was predatory. It whipped my hair across my face and instantly bit through the thin fabric of my uniform. I pulled my threadbare coat tighter around myself, burying my chin in the scarf that had seen better decades, let alone better days. I checked my watch. 11:42 p.m. The last express bus to the south side left in 8 minutes. If I missed it, I'd be stuck waiting for the local, which added 40 minutes to a commute that was already dangerous enough at this hour. I started to walk fast, keeping my head down against the gale. The city was screaming tonight. Sirens wailed in the distance, a constant dissonant harmony to the aggressive honking of taxis and the rumble of late-night delivery trucks. The streetlights flickered overhead, casting long, distorted shadows that danced on the wet pavement. It had been raining for hours, a relentless, freezing downpour that turned the gutters into rushing rivers of black sludge. I navigated the puddles by memory, hopping over the cracked pavement near the bakery, skirting the blocked drain by the newsstand. I was 2 blocks away from the bus stop when I saw him. At first, I thought it was a trick of the light, or maybe a discarded mannequin from the department store renovation down the street. But then the figure moved, stumbling sideways into the crosswalk against the light. A yellow taxi swerved violently, its horn blasting a long, angry note. The driver shouted something indistinguishable, but clearly profane through his closed window before speeding off, tires spraying a fan of dirty water into the air. The figure didn't react. He didn't jump back. He didn't yell. He just stood there, right in the middle of the intersection, staring at the sky as if he were trying to read a message written in the clouds. I stopped. My breath hitched in my throat, forming a white cloud that was instantly snatched away by the wind. "Don't do it, Chloe," I whispered to myself. "You're going to miss the bus. You have an exam tomorrow. Just keep walking." I took a step forward, my eyes fixed on the bus stop sign in the distance. I could see the headlights of the express bus turning the corner 3 blocks down. It was coming. I could make it if I ran. Then another car, a dark sedan, locked its brakes, screeching to a halt inches from the man's legs. The driver leaned out, screaming, "Get out of the road, you lunatic!" The man in the street turned slowly. Even from this distance, I could see he looked confused. He was holding something to his ear. My stomach dropped. He looked terrified. Not the fear of someone almost hit by a car, but the primal, wide-eyed fear of a child lost in a supermarket. "Damn it!" I hissed through my chattering teeth. I pivoted on my heel and ran, not toward the bus, but toward the intersection. The water soaked through my canvas sneakers instantly, freezing my toes, but I ignored it. I dodged a bicycle courier who didn't have lights on, ignored his shout of protest, and sprinted onto the asphalt. "Sir!" I yelled, waving my arms to alert the oncoming traffic. "Sir, you have to move!" He didn't hear me. The wind stole my voice. He was wearing a suit, I realized as I got closer. A dark, impeccably tailored suit that was currently being ruined by the deluge. His silver hair was plastered to his skull, water dripping down his nose and chin. I reached him just as a delivery truck barreled down the street, its air horn blasting. I didn't think. I grabbed the sleeve of his soaking wet jacket and yanked him backward with every ounce of strength I had left after my shift. "Move!" I grunted, pulling him toward the sidewalk. He wasn't heavy, but he was dead weight, his feet dragging as if he didn't understand how to walk. The truck roared past us, the draft of wind so strong it nearly knocked us both over. The splash of water hit me full in the face, tasting of oil and grit. We stumbled onto the curb, collapsing under the awning of a closed jewelry store. I was panting, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. I wiped the sludge from my eyes and looked at him. He was older than I thought. Maybe late 60s, early 70s. His face was lined with deep grooves, but he was handsome in a distinguished, classical way. He was shivering violently, his lips turning a pale shade of blue, and he was holding a black leather loafer to his ear. "Hello?" he said into the heel of the shoe. "Martha? The line is bad. I can't hear you, my love." The realization hit me harder than the cold. He wasn't drunk. He wasn't high. "Sir," I said gently, reaching out to touch his arm. He flinched, pulling away from me, clutching the shoe to his chest protectively. "I have to tell her I'll be late," he muttered, his eyes darting around the empty street, not seeing the buildings or the cars, but seeing something else entirely. "The meeting ran long. The boys are waiting." "It's okay," I said, keeping my voice low and calm, the way I used to talk to the stray cats behind my building. "You're safe. You're out of the road." He blinked, his eyes finally focusing on me. They were a piercing dark brown, almost black, and for a second, clarity swam in them before drowning again in confusion. "Martha," he whispered, reaching out a trembling hand to touch a lock of my wet red hair that had escaped my scarf. "You came. I knew you would come. I told them you wouldn't leave me here." My heart broke a little. I didn't know who Martha was, but the way he said her name was full of such desperate adoration it made my chest ache. "I'm not Martha," I said softly, though I didn't pull away from his icy touch. "My name is Chloe, but I'm going to help you, okay?" I looked down the street. The express bus whizzed past the stop without slowing down. I watched its red taillights fade into the gloom. There went my ride. There went my 4 hours of sleep. I looked back at the man. He was shaking harder now, his teeth chattering audibly. "Hypothermia was a real risk out here. We need to get you warm," I said. I unbuttoned my coat. It wasn't much. Polyester and fake wool I'd bought at a thrift store. But it was dry on the inside. No, he protested weakly as I draped it over his shoulders. A gentleman does not take a lady's coat. This gentleman is going to freeze if he doesn't take it," I said firmly, pulling the lapels together over his chest. Underneath, his suit jacket was soaked through. I noticed the cufflinks then. Gold, heavy, engraved with a crest I didn't recognize, and the watch on his wrist looked like it cost more than the entire building I lived in. He was rich, ridiculously rich, which meant someone was probably looking for him. Or worse, someone had dumped him here. "Do you have a phone?" I asked. "A real phone, not the shoe." He looked down at the shoe in his hand, a flicker of embarrassment crossing his face, as if he suddenly realized what it was. He dropped it. I had one," he stammered. "I don't know. Everything is foggy, Martha." "Why is it so foggy?" "It's okay," I soothed, rubbing his arms briskly to generate some friction. "Do you remember your name? Can you tell me who you are?" He frowned, concentration etching deep lines into his forehead. "Carlo," he said finally. "I am Carlo." "Okay, Carlo. That's a good start. Do you know where you live?" He pointed vaguely toward the skyline, toward the towering penthouses that pierced the clouds in the distance. "The house with the lions," he said. "The boys like the lions." That wasn't helpful. Chicago had a lot of lions. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my cracked smartphone. 12% battery. Perfect. "I'm going to call the police," I told him. "They can help find your family." Panic seized him instantly. He grabbed my wrist, his grip surprisingly strong for someone so frail. "No police!" he rasped, his eyes wide with terror. "No police, Martha. They are not friends. You know this. Promise me, no police." The intensity of his fear startled me. It wasn't just confusion. It was ingrained, trained behavior. Okay, I said, putting the phone down but not away. "No police. But we can't stay here, Carlo. You're freezing. Is there anyone else I can call? A son? A daughter? Marco," he breathed. The name seemed to ground him. "Marco will be angry. He told me to stay in the library. He gets so angry when I leave the library. Marco is your son?" He nodded. "Marco fixes it. Marco always fixes it." "Okay. Does Marco have a number?" Carlo patted his pockets frantically, water squelching in the fabric. He pulled out a soggy handkerchief, a few mints, and then, miraculously, a folded piece of heavy cardstock. It looked like an invitation or a place card. I took it carefully. The ink was running, but I could make out a logo embossed in gold foil and a handwritten number on the back in sharp, aggressive strokes. I dialed the number before I could talk myself out of it. It rang once, twice, then the line clicked open. No hello, no greeting, just silence. A heavy, listening silence that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. "Hello?" I said, my voice sounding thin against the wind. I think I found your father. Or someone named Carlo. He's confused and—" "Where?" The voice was deep, rough, and commanded absolute obedience. It wasn't a question. It was an order. "I'm at the corner of 5th and Grand," I stammered. "Under the awning of the jewelry store. He's really cold, you need to—" The line went dead. I stared at the phone. "Well, he's rude," I muttered, shoving the device back into my pocket. "Marco is coming?" Carlo asked, hope lighting up his face. "I think so," I said. "Come on, let's stand closer to the wall. The wind is shifting." We stood there for what felt like an eternity. But my phone said it was only 4 minutes. I tried to keep Carlo talking, asking him about the lions and the library. But he was fading again, shivering so hard his teeth clicked together rhythmically. I wrapped my arms around him, sharing what little body heat I had, ignoring the way the cold seeped into my uniform, turning my skin into ice. I was beginning to regret calling the mystery number instead of an ambulance when the sound changed. The usual city noise, the distant sirens, the random honks, was suddenly drowned out by the roar of engines. Deep, guttural engines. 3 black SUVs tore around the corner, moving in a tight formation that looked practiced, military. They ignored the red light, ignored the lanes, and swerved directly toward us. My instinct screamed, "Danger." "Carlo, get behind me," I said, my voice trembling but my feet planting themselves firmly on the concrete. The vehicles screeched to a halt in a semicircle, blocking us in against the storefront. The headlights were blinding, pinning us like insects on a display board. I squinted, raising a hand to shield my eyes. Doors flew open in perfect synchronization. Men poured out. They weren't police. They weren't paramedics. They were massive, dressed in dark suits that absorbed the light. And they were armed. I saw the glint of metal in the hand of the man closest to us. A gun. A real gun. "Oh God," I breathed. Carlo whimpered behind me. "The bad men," he whispered. "Martha, the bad men are here." The fear in his voice galvanized me. I didn't know who these people were. Kidnappers, gang members, enemies of this Marco. But I knew one thing. I wasn't going to let them hurt a confused old man who just wanted to go home to his library. "Stay back," I yelled, stepping fully in front of Carlo, spreading my arms to shield him. It was a ridiculous gesture. I was 5'4", and armed with a name tag and a soaking wet apron. They were giants with firearms. But I didn't move. "I said stay back," I screamed again over the rain. "If you touch him, I swear to God I'll scream until the cops come." The men hesitated. Not because they were afraid of me, but because they seemed confused by me. They lowered their weapons slightly, glancing at each other. Then, the back door of the middle SUV opened. The atmosphere changed instantly. The other men stiffened, straightening their posture. A man stepped out. He didn't rush like the others. He moved with a terrifying, predatory grace. He was tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a black wool coat with the collar turned up. The rain seemed to avoid him, or maybe he just didn't care about it. He walked into the circle of light, and I stopped breathing. He was devastatingly handsome, but in the way a storm is beautiful, dangerous, powerful, and utterly indifferent to your survival. His hair was jet black, slicked back from a face composed of sharp angles and hard lines. His jaw was set in stone, but it was his eyes that froze me. They were dark, endless pits of obsidian, devoid of warmth or mercy. He scanned the scene, taking in his men, the street, and finally me. He looked at me shielding the old man. He looked at my shaking hands, my defiant stance, my ruined uniform. He didn't blink. He walked straight toward me. "Don't come any closer," I warned, my voice cracking. "I have pepper spray." I didn't. I had a stick of gum and a lip balm. The man stopped 3 feet away. He towered over me, blocking out the headlights, blocking out the rain, blocking out the world. He smelled of ozone, expensive leather, and something smoky and dark. He looked over my head, his gaze landing on the shivering figure behind me. "Papa," he said. The word was soft, but it carried a weight that made the pavement vibrate. Carlo peeked out from behind my shoulder. "Marco," he quavered. I lost my shoe." The man, Marco, closed his eyes for a brief second, and I saw a crack in the armor. A flash of relief so profound it looked painful. But it was gone as quickly as it came, replaced by the mask of stone. He looked back down at me. His gaze felt like a physical touch, heavy and invasive. He looked at my arms spread wide to protect his father. He looked at his father wearing my cheap thrift store coat, while I stood in the freezing rain in nothing but a thin polyester waitress dress. "You," he said. His voice was the same one from the phone, deep and rough, vibrating through my chest. "Step aside." "No," I said, surprised by my own audacity. "How do I know you're Marco?" "Prove it. Tell me something only his son would know." The men behind him gasped. One of them took a step forward, raising his gun. "Boss, she's—" Marco raised a hand, silencing the man instantly. He didn't look away from me. For the first time, a flicker of something appeared in those dark eyes. Not anger. Curiosity. "He thinks the stone lions at the library guard his books," Marco said, his voice low, intimate amidst the chaos. "And he calls everyone he trusts Martha." The air left my lungs. Carlo let out a happy sigh behind me. "It is Marco," Carlo said, patting my shoulder. "See, Martha? Marco fixes it." I slowly lowered my arms. My adrenaline crashed, leaving me trembling so hard I could barely stand. "Okay," I whispered. "Okay. He was in the road. He's really cold." Marco stepped past me, closing the distance to his father in one stride. The transition was jarring. The terrifying predator vanished, replaced by a gentle giant. He stripped off his own heavy coat and wrapped it around Carlo, over my coat. "I've got you, Papa," he murmured, guiding the old man toward the car. "I've got you. Why did you leave the house?" "The rain," Carlo mumbled. "I wanted to feel the rain." Marco's jaw tightened. He handed his father to 2 of the guards, who handled the old man with surprising tenderness, helping him into the back of the SUV where it was warm. I stood alone on the curb. The adrenaline was gone, replaced by the biting cold. I was soaked to the bone, my teeth were chattering uncontrollably, and I had missed my bus. I was stranded. I hugged my arms around myself, trying to stop the shaking. "Well," I said to the empty air, "that happened." I turned to walk away, back toward the bus stop to wait 40 minutes for the local. "Where do you think you're going?" The voice stopped me. I turned back. Marco was standing by the open door of the SUV. He hadn't got in. He was watching me. The rain dripped from his hair, running down his face. But he didn't seem to notice. "Home," I said, my teeth clicking on the word. "I'm going home." He looked at my shoes, canvas sneakers that were now completely gray with sludge. He looked at my arms, blue with cold. He looked at the empty street where no bus was coming. "Get in," he said. It wasn't a question. I'm fine, I lied. The bus is coming. The bus isn't coming for 40 minutes, he countered. You'll be hypothermic in 10. He walked back toward me. I wanted to back away, but my legs wouldn't cooperate. He stopped close enough that I could feel the heat radiating off his body. You stood in front of a gun for a man you don't know, he said. It sounded like an accusation. Why? I looked up at him, meeting those terrifying dark eyes. Because he was scared, I said honestly, and nobody else stopped. Marco stared at me for a long beat. The silence stretched, heavy and charged. He reached out, and for a second, I thought he was going to touch my face. Instead, he opened the back door of the SUV wider. Get in, he repeated, his voice softer this time, but no less commanding. I'll take you home. I can't, I said. I don't know you. You have guns. You're dangerous. I am, he agreed without hesitation. But I owe you a debt. And DeLucas always pay their debts. Get in the car, Chloe. He knew my name. I hadn't told him my name. Carlo must have said it. Or maybe he just knew things. I looked at the warm leather interior of the car. I looked at the dark, freezing street. I looked at Marco, who looked like he could snap my neck with one hand, but who had just wrapped his father in a coat like a precious porcelain doll. If you try anything, I warned, I really do have pepper spray. One corner of his mouth quirked up. It wasn't a smile, not really. But it was close. Understood, he said. I climbed into the car. The warmth hit me instantly, wrapping around me like a blanket. I slid across the leather seat, sitting next to Carlo, who was already half asleep. Marco got in after me, closing the door and sealing out the storm. The silence inside was absolute. Drive, Marco said to the driver. As the car pulled away from the curb, gliding smoothly into the night, I leaned my head back against the seat and closed my eyes. I was warm. I was safe. But as I felt Marco's gaze on me from the other side of the seat, heavy and calculating, I had the distinct feeling that I had just stepped out of the rain and into something far more turbulent. The silence inside the SUV was heavier than the storm raging against the reinforced glass. It wasn't an empty silence. It was a living, breathing thing, pressurized by the presence of the man sitting on the other side of the leather bench seat. I sat perfectly still, barely daring to breathe, my back pressed against the door as if I could melt through it and escape. The heat blasting from the vents was heavenly, prickling my frozen skin with 1,000 tiny needles of warmth. But I couldn't relax, not with him watching me. Marco DeLuca didn't fidget. He didn't check his phone. He didn't look out the window. He sat with the stillness of a predator waiting for movement, his dark eyes fixed on the space between us, specifically on his father. Carlo had fallen asleep almost instantly. His head, heavy and wet, rested on my shoulder. His breathing was a soft, rattling snore that vibrated against my collarbone. My cheap, sodden coat was still draped over him, ruining the pristine Italian leather of the car seats. But Marco didn't seem to care about the upholstery. He was staring at his father's sleeping face, with an expression that terrified me more than his gun had. It was a look of raw, unvarnished shock. He never sleeps, Marco said. The voice was low, a rumble of thunder that seemed to come from the chassis of the car itself. It wasn't directed at me, not really, but I felt compelled to answer. He was exhausted, I whispered, afraid to wake the old man. The cold. It drains you. Marco's gaze snapped up to mine. The vulnerability vanished, replaced instantly by that wall of stone. He scanned me again, a forensic examination that missed nothing. He looked at my hair, plastered to my skull in wet red tangles. He looked at the smear of grease on my cheek from the diner. He looked at my hands, chapped and red, clutching the strap of my purse like a lifeline. And then he looked at my feet. My sneakers were a lost cause. The canvas had turned a dark, muddy gray, and I knew he could see the hole in the side where my sock was poking through. I resisted the urge to tuck my feet under the seat. I wouldn't hide. I had worked 12 hours on those feet. I had paid for those shoes with money I bled for. Where do you live, Chloe? The question was simple, but the weight behind it was crushing. Telling a man like this where I slept felt like handing him the key to my throat. South Side, I said vaguely. Near the old textile district. Address, he commanded. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. I hesitated. The driver, a mountain of a man with a thick neck and tattooed knuckles, glanced at me in the rearview mirror. His eyes said, "Don't be stupid, girl. Just answer." 4200 South Archer, I said, the numbers tasting like ash in my mouth. Apartment 4B. Marco nodded once to the driver. The car surged forward, weaving through the traffic with aggressive precision. For the next 20 minutes, nobody spoke. I focused on the rhythmic rise and fall of Carlo's chest against my arm. He smelled of rain and expensive aftershave, a sharp contrast to the stale fryer grease clinging to my uniform. He felt frail, like a bird with hollow bones, and my protective instinct, the one that had made me jump in front of a gun, was still humming under my skin. When the car finally slowed, I felt a familiar knot of shame tighten in my gut. My building was an eyesore even by the neighborhood's low standards. The brickwork was crumbling. The front door had been kicked in so many times it didn't close properly, and the security light above the entrance had been broken for 6 months. It looked exactly like what it was, a place for people who had run out of options. The SUV idled at the curb, looking like a spaceship that had landed in a landfill. "Thank you for the ride," I said, trying to shift Carlo's weight gently off my shoulder. The old man stirred, mumbling something about the library books, before settling back against the seat, his head now resting on the leather headrest. Marco reached out, his large hand cupping his father's cheek for a brief second. It was a gesture of such unexpected tenderness that I had to look away. "Wait," Marco said as I reached for the handle. He opened his door and stepped out into the rain. Before I could process what was happening, he had walked around the back of the car and opened my door. He offered me a hand. I stared at it. His hand was large, the fingers long and calloused, seemingly carved from marble. A gold signet ring glinted on his pinky. "I can walk," I said, ignoring his hand and stepping out onto the cracked sidewalk. My wet shoes squelched loudly, a humiliating sound in the quiet street. Marco didn't retract his hand. He just adjusted his cuff, his face impassive. "I'll walk you to your door. That's really not necessary. This isn't the kind of neighborhood where guys in suits just stroll around." "Exactly," he said, "which is why I'm walking you to your door." He slammed the car door shut and turned toward the building. He moved with an arrogant confidence that screamed ownership. He didn't look worried about muggers or gangs. He walked like he was the danger they should be worried about. I hurried to keep up, my shorter legs struggling to match his stride. We stepped into the vestibule, the smell of stale urine and boiled cabbage hitting us instantly. I saw Marco's nose twitch, a microscopic reaction, but he didn't say a word. We climbed the 3 flights of stairs in silence. The graffiti on the walls seemed brighter tonight, the insults and gang tags screaming for attention. I kept my eyes on the steps, praying that Mrs. Higgins wasn't cooking fish and that the drug dealer in 3C wasn't conducting business in the hallway. When we reached 4B, I stopped dead. My heart plummeted into my stomach. There, taped to the peeling paint of my door, was a bright red piece of paper. It was aggressive, loud, and impossible to miss. Notice of eviction. I closed my eyes, wishing the floor would open up and swallow me whole. I knew it was coming. I knew I was 2 months behind. But to have it plastered there, in front of him, I felt Marco move behind me. He wasn't crowding me, but his presence was a wall of heat at my back. He leaned in, reading the notice over my shoulder. I could feel his breath on my neck, hot and steady. He didn't ask how much it was. He didn't ask why I hadn't paid. He didn't ask if I had somewhere else to go. He just read it, absorbing the information like a computer processing data. "I have it handled," I lied, my voice sounding brittle and defensive. I ripped the paper off the door and crumpled it into a tight ball in my fist. "It's a mix-up with the bank." Marco looked down at me. In the harsh, flickering light of the hallway, he looked even more intimidating. The shadows clung to the hollows of his cheeks. "Go inside, Chloe," he said. Lock the door," he interrupted. "And turn up the heat. You're shaking." I hadn't realized I was shaking until he said it. I fumbled with my keys, my fingers numb and clumsy. Finally, the lock clicked. I pushed the door open, revealing the dark, cramped studio apartment that was my entire world. I turned back to say something. Maybe thank you, maybe goodbye, maybe go to hell. But he was already turning away. He walked toward the stairs without looking back, his heavy footsteps echoing on the concrete. I went inside and locked the door. I engaged the deadbolt, then the chain. Then I slid down against the wood and buried my face in my knees. The crumpled eviction notice still clutched in my hand. I didn't sleep that night. I sat by the radiator, wrapped in my duvet, shivering as the adrenaline crashed, and the reality of my life set back in. The next morning was a blur of misery. I woke up with a pounding headache and a throat that felt like I had swallowed broken glass. My nose was stuffed, my limbs heavy, but I didn't have the luxury of a sick day. I dragged myself into the shower, praying the hot water wouldn't run out. It did, after 3 minutes. I was dressed and trying to make my hair look presentable when my phone buzzed. It was a text from Stan. Don't bother coming in. Mr. Henderson saw the cops in the SUVs last night. He says you bring trouble. Pick up your final check next week. We're done. I stared at the screen, the white letters swimming before my eyes. Fired. Just like that. No warning, no conversation. Just a text message ending the only stream of income standing between me and the street. No, I whispered. No. I tried to call the diner, but it went straight to voicemail. I tried calling Stan, but he blocked me after one ring. Panic, cold and sharp, sliced through the fog of my cold. I sat on the edge of my pull-out couch and dumped the contents of my purse onto the cushion. $12 in cash. A handful of quarters. My debit card had a balance of $43. The eviction notice demanded $1,200 by Friday. I was done. I didn't cry. I was too tired to cry. I went into survival mode. I pulled my 2 battered suitcases from the top of the closet and started packing. Clothes, books, the few toiletries I had, my laptop, which was my most valuable possession, and my portal to the one thing that kept me sane, my art classes. I moved mechanically, folding t-shirts and stacking sketchbooks. I wrapped my only good painting, a watercolor of the Chicago skyline at sunset, in a towel and placed it gently in the bottom of the bag. I was taping up a box of kitchen supplies when a knock sounded at the door. Heavy. Authoritative. 3 sharp raps. My stomach twisted. The landlord. He was here to scream at me, to tell me to get out now instead of waiting for the sheriff. I stood up, wiping my dusty hands on my jeans. I took a deep breath, steeling myself for the confrontation. I would beg if I had to. Just a few more days. Just until I could find a shelter. I unlocked the deadbolt and pulled the door open. I know I'm late, Mr. Kowalski, but I just need... The words died in my throat. It wasn't my landlord. Marco DeLuca stood in the hallway. He looked different in the daylight, but no less dangerous. He was wearing a gray charcoal suit today, the fabric hugging his broad shoulders perfectly. He wasn't wearing a tie, and the top button of his white shirt was undone, exposing a glimpse of tanned skin. He filled the doorway, blocking out the light, blocking out the hallway, blocking out the oxygen. His eyes swept over the room behind me, landing immediately on the open suitcases and the half-packed boxes. His expression didn't change, but his jaw tightened slightly. Going somewhere? He asked. I gripped the doorframe, my knuckles turning white. I don't see how that's your business. May I come in? It was phrased as a question, but he stepped forward as he said it, forcing me to retreat or be trampled. I stepped back, and he walked into my tiny apartment, bringing the scent of ozone and expensive sandalwood with him. He looked out of place among my thrift store furniture and peeling wallpaper. He was a panther in a cardboard box. What do you want? I asked, crossing my arms over my chest to hide the stain on my sweatshirt. Did I forget something in your car? Did I scratch the leather? Marco turned to face me. He didn't look angry. He looked determined. My father woke up this morning, he said. I blinked. Okay, that's good. He asked for Martha. I told you, I'm not... I know who you are, Chloe Wells, he interrupted. 23 years old, student at the Institute of Art, online program. Waitress at the Greasy Spoon until this morning, I assume. My blood ran cold. You checked up on me? I check on everyone who gets within 10 feet of my family, he said calmly. It's a precaution. But that's not why I'm here. He walked over to the stack of sketchbooks I had placed on the table. He picked the top one up. I started to lunge forward to stop him. Those were private. But I froze. He opened it with surprising care. He looked at the charcoal sketch of a gargoyle I had drawn from a church downtown. You have talent, he murmured. Stop it, I snapped. Why are you here? To mock me? To offer me charity because you saw the eviction notice? He closed the sketchbook and placed it back on the stack, aligning the edges perfectly. I don't do charity, he said, turning those dark, intense eyes on me. And I don't mock people who work for a living. I'm here to offer you a job. I laughed. It was a harsh, bitter sound that hurt my throat. A job? What? Do you need a waitress for your Mafia clubhouse? The air in the room dropped 10 degrees. Marco took a step toward me. He didn't look amused. Careful. He warned softly. I am offering you a lifeline. Do not cut it before you hear the terms. I bit my lip, silencing my sarcasm. I looked at the boxes. I looked at the eviction notice still crumpled on the floor where I had thrown it. I couldn't afford pride right now. What kind of job? I asked quietly. My father needs a caregiver, Marco said. Full-time. Live-in. I frowned. You have money. You can hire the best nurses in the city. Why me? I'm not a nurse. I don't have a degree in geriatrics. I'm an art student who serves coffee. I have hired the best nurses, Marco said, his voice hard. 5 of them in the last 6 months. 2 quit. 3 I fired. Why? Because they treated him like a patient, Marco said, his voice dropping to a growl. Like a broken piece of furniture. They drugged him when he got agitated. They ignored him when he spoke nonsense. They didn't listen. He took another step closer. He was so close now I could see the flecks of gold in his iris. Last night in the rain. You didn't treat him like a burden. You treated him like a man. You gave him your coat. You stood in front of a gun for him. And he remembers you. He remembers Martha. He ate breakfast this morning for the first time in a week because I told him you might visit. I felt a lump form in my throat. I remembered Carlo's fragile hand holding the shoe. He has Alzheimer's, I said. It's not easy. He'll get worse. I know what he has. Marco snapped, a flash of pain crossing his face. I don't need a diagnosis. I need someone who will keep him safe. Someone who will talk to him, not at him. I need someone he trusts. And for some godforsaken reason, he trusts you. He reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and pulled out a folded envelope. He held it out to me. Weekly salary, he said. Cash. Tax-free. Plus room and board at the estate. All expenses paid. I took the envelope. It felt thick. I opened the flap and peeked inside. My breath hitched. There was more money in this envelope than I made in 4 months at the diner. This is... I stammered. This is too much. It's hazard pay, Marco said dryly. My father can be difficult, and my life is complicated. You will be required to live at the estate. You will not discuss family business with anyone. You will not bring guests. Total discretion. It was a deal with the devil. I knew it. He was a crime boss. His house was probably a fortress filled with men like the ones in the SUVs. But then I looked around my apartment. I looked at the mold in the corner of the ceiling. I thought about the winter coming, the cold wind, the hunger, and I thought about Carlo, lost in the rain, looking for his wife. I have conditions, I said, my voice shaking but my chin held high. Marco raised an eyebrow. He looked surprised that I was negotiating. Name them. I'm not a prisoner, I said. I need to be able to finish my degree. I need internet access and time to study. I won't drop out of school to babysit. Marco nodded slowly. Done. The estate has a library. You can study there. The internet is secure. And I want a contract, I added. In writing, defining my duties. I'm a caregiver, not a maid, not a cook. And definitely not anything else. His eyes darkened, sweeping over me in a way that made my skin prickle. But he nodded again. You are there for my father. Nothing else. I will have the papers drawn up." He looked at his watch, a diamond-encrusted timepiece that probably cost more than my tuition. "Pack your things," he said. "The car is downstairs. We leave in 10 minutes. 10 minutes? But I need to. The landlord is coming up the stairs," Marco said casually, tilting his head toward the door. "I heard the front door open. Unless you want to have that conversation with him, I suggest you grab your boxes." Panic flared again. I grabbed my purse. I grabbed the painting. I zipped up the suitcase. Marco didn't wait for me to ask for help. He picked up the heavy suitcase as if it weighed nothing. He picked up the box of books with his other hand. "Let's go," he said. I followed him out into the hallway. We passed Mr. Kowalski on the second-floor landing. The landlord stopped, his mouth falling open as he saw the giant man in the expensive suit carrying my battered luggage. "Ms. Wells," Mr. Kowalski sputtered. "Where are you going? The rent is—" Marco stopped. He turned to look at the landlord. He didn't say a word. He just stared. A cold, dead stare that promised violence. Mr. Kowalski swallowed hard, stepping back against the wall, his face paling. "Never mind," he squeaked. "Good luck." We walked out into the sunlight. The black SUV was waiting. The driver opened the trunk for my bags. I stood on the sidewalk for a moment, looking back at the building that had been my prison and my shelter for 3 years. I felt a strange sense of vertigo, like the world was tilting on its axis. Marco opened the back door for me. "Get in," he said softly. I climbed inside. The door closed with a solid final thud. As the car pulled away, leaving my old life in the rearview mirror, I realized I had just traded poverty for danger. I wasn't sure if I had been saved or captured. But as I looked at Marco's profile, stern and unyielding as he watched the city pass by, I knew one thing for certain. I wasn't invisible anymore. Living at the DeLuca estate was like living inside a museum that doubled as a high-security prison. The walls were lined with oil paintings that cost more than the entire neighborhood I grew up in, and the windows were made of bulletproof glass, thick enough to stop a sniper round. It had been 3 weeks since I traded my apron for a key card, and the silence of the mansion was still something I hadn't adjusted to. It wasn't a peaceful silence. It was a held breath, a constant state of anticipation waiting for the other shoe to drop. My world had shrunk to the East Wing, the library, and the sprawling gardens where I took Carlo for his afternoon walks. I hadn't seen much of Marco. He was a ghost in his own home, leaving before dawn and returning long after the house had gone dark. I only knew he was there by the lingering scent of sandalwood in the hallways, or the occasional glimpse of a black SUV tearing down the driveway. "Blue," Carlo muttered, staring at the blank canvas I had set up on the easel in the sunroom. "It needs to be blue, Martha, like the water at Como. We can do blue," I said softly, squeezing a generous dollop of cerulean paint onto the palette. I handed him the brush. "Show me the water, Carlo." His hand, usually plagued by the tremors of age and illness, steadied as soon as his fingers wrapped around the wooden handle. He attacked the canvas with a fervor that always surprised me. This was my idea: art therapy. The nurses before me had tried to sedate him when he got agitated, when the fog in his mind became too thick to navigate. I found that giving him a way to speak without words worked better than any pill. I watched him paint, sipping my tea. He wasn't just an old man with Alzheimer's in these moments. He was an artist reclaiming his memories. "You have a light touch with him." The voice came from the doorway, deep and vibrating with that familiar, dangerous timbre. I didn't jump, though my heart gave a traitorous kick against my ribs. I turned slowly. Marco was leaning against the doorframe, arms crossed over his chest. He wasn't wearing his jacket today, just a black dress shirt with the sleeves rolled up to his elbows, revealing forearms corded with muscle and a faint white scar running down his left wrist. He looked tired. Not the physical exhaustion of a long shift, but the soul-deep weariness of a man carrying the world on his back. "He's having a good day," I said, keeping my voice even. "The painting helps focus his energy. Yesterday he thought the gardener was stealing his cufflinks, but today he's just painting the lake." Marco walked into the room. The air seemed to shift, becoming heavier, charged with his static. He stopped behind his father. watching the chaotic swirls of blue and white forming on the canvas. "He hasn't painted in 10 years, Marco said quietly. "Not since my mother died. He burned all his brushes the day after the funeral." I looked at Carlo, who was humming a tune I didn't recognize, lost in his creation. Maybe he just needed someone to hand them back to him. Marco turned his gaze to me. It was intense, dissecting. He looked at the paint smudge on my cheek, my hair tied back in a messy bun with a pencil stuck through it, my oversized sweater. I felt suddenly exposed, despite being fully clothed. "You're doing well, Chloe," he said. It sounded less like a compliment and more like a tactical assessment. "My head of security tells me you follow protocol. You don't ask questions. You don't try to leave the grounds." "I have everything I need here," I replied, gesturing to the stack of art history textbooks on the side table. "And the Wi-Fi is fast. I submitted my midterm paper yesterday." "Good." He took a step closer, invading my personal space. The scent of him, tobacco, rain, and that expensive soap, filled my senses. "But the quiet days are ending. I need you to be aware." "Aware of what?" "Changes," he said cryptically. "We have competitors. The Albanian faction is testing our borders. Security will be tighter starting tonight. You might see more men on the grounds. You're to keep my father inside the main house after sunset. No exceptions." I nodded, absorbing the information. "Is he in danger?" "Everyone near me is in danger," Marco said. "That includes you now." He didn't wait for a response. He turned and walked out, leaving me with the cold draft of his departure and the unsettling realization that the golden cage was about to get a lot smaller. The tension in the house didn't just rise, it solidified. Over the next few days, the atmosphere became suffocating. The jovial guards I had started to recognize were replaced by stone-faced men carrying automatic rifles. The windows were shuttered earlier. Even the staff, the cook, the maids, moved with their heads down, speaking in hushed whispers that died whenever I entered a room. I focused on Carlo. I kept him distracted with old records and painting sessions, shielding him from the mounting pressure. But I couldn't shield myself. It was a Tuesday night when the reality of Marco's world crashed into my routine. I was in the kitchen at 1 a.m. unable to sleep. I was making a cup of chamomile tea, watching the steam rise in the dim light of the stove hood. The house was silent, a tomb of marble and mahogany. The back door opened. I froze, gripping the mug. The keypad beeped, signaling a valid code, and the heavy lock disengaged. Marco walked in. He looked like a wreck. His suit jacket was missing. His white shirt was unbuttoned halfway down his chest, stained with dirt and dark, wet patches. His hair was wild, and there was a bruise forming rapidly along his jawline. He was breathing hard, favoring his left side. He stopped when he saw me. For a second, his hand twitched toward his waistband, a reflex that chilled me to the bone. Then he recognized me. "Chloe," he rasped. His voice sounded like it had been dragged over gravel. "You're hurt," I said, setting the tea down. I didn't scream. I didn't run. I walked toward him. "It's nothing," he grunted, moving toward the sink. He turned on the faucet, the water rushing out. He shoved his hands under the stream. "Just wine." Spilled a damn bottle of vintage red. I stopped beside him. I looked at the water swirling in the stainless steel basin. It was running pink, then red, dark red, thicker than wine. I looked at his hands. His knuckles were split open, raw and angry. There was dried blood, some his, some definitely not, caked under his fingernails. "That's a lot of wine," I said softly. He didn't look at me. He just kept scrubbing, his movements aggressive, almost desperate. It was a clumsy night. A disagreement with a business partner. Marco. I reached out and turned off the tap. The silence that followed was deafening. He stood there, water dripping from his hands, his chest heaving. He looked at me then, daring me to challenge his lie, daring me to be horrified. I wasn't horrified. I was pragmatic. I had grown up in a neighborhood where sirens were lullabies. I knew what violence looked like. I reached for the clean dish towel hanging on the oven door. I took his left hand in mine. It was huge, dwarfing my fingers. It was trembling slightly. You're going to get an infection if you scrub them raw like that, I said. I wet a corner of the towel with warm water and reached for the bottle of dish soap. Gently, methodically, I began to clean his knuckles. I wiped away the wine. I cleaned the grit from the cuts. I didn't ask who he hit. I didn't ask why he was bleeding from his side. Marco went still. He watched me work, his gaze burning the top of my head. He didn't pull away. You're not asking, he murmured. You pay me to care for your father and be discreet, I said, focusing on a particularly nasty gash on his index finger. Asking questions seems like a violation of the contract. Most people would run, he said. Or faint, or call the police. I've seen blood before, Marco, and I told you I needed this job. I'm not going to throw it away because you had a bad night. He let out a short, humorless laugh. A bad night. You have no idea. I finished cleaning his hands and dried them with the dry end of the towel. Then I looked at his side, where the shirt was stuck to his skin. Do you need a doctor for your ribs? No, he said sharply. Just a bruise. I'll tape it myself. Okay. I stepped back, putting a professional distance between us. There's fresh tea on the counter if you want it. It helps with the adrenaline. I turned to leave, intending to retreat to my room before my courage failed me. Chloe. I stopped at the doorway. Thank you, he said. The words were quiet, stripped of his usual command. Good night, Marco. I walked back to my room, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I sat on my bed, staring at my own hands. They weren't shaking. I had touched the violence of his world, washed it off his skin, and I hadn't crumbled. I was stronger than I thought. Or maybe I was becoming something else entirely. Something that fit in this dark house. 2 days later, the storm hit. A real Midwestern thunderstorm that turned the sky green and rattled the window panes in their frames. The thunder was constant, a rolling artillery barrage that set Carlo on edge. I spent 3 hours reading to him in the library, trying to drown out the noise, until he finally succumbed to a nap in his leather armchair. I stretched, my back popping. The house was dark, the power flickering intermittently. I decided to go to the kitchen to fetch a glass of water. As I passed the study, Marco's sanctuary, a room I was strictly forbidden to enter, I heard a sound. It was a groan, low, pained, animalistic. I hesitated. Protocol said, keep walking. Survival instinct said, run away. But the sound came again, followed by the crash of glass shattering. I tried the door handle. Unlocked. I pushed the heavy oak door open. The room was pitch black, the heavy velvet curtains drawn tight against the flashes of lightning outside. Marco, I whispered. Get out! A voice snarled from the darkness. It was vicious, filled with agony. I didn't leave. I stepped inside, letting my eyes adjust. I saw a silhouette slumped over the massive mahogany desk. A lamp lay broken on the floor. Is it an attack? I asked, adrenaline spiking. Are you hurt? Light, he hissed. No light. My head. Migraine. I recognized the signs immediately. My mother used to get them. Blinding headaches that made her vomit and weep, triggered by pressure changes in the weather. It's the storm, I said, my voice dropping to a whisper. The barometric pressure. It feels like an ice pick, he groaned, burying his face in his hands. Get out, Chloe. I don't want you to see me like this. Shut up, Marco, I said gently. I moved into the room, navigating by memory and the faint gray light leaking from the hallway. I went to the wet bar in the corner. I found the ice bucket, miraculously full, and wrapped a handful of cubes in a linen napkin. I walked around the desk. He was trembling, his knuckles white as he gripped the edge of the wood. The mighty Don of Chicago, brought to his knees by his own biology. Lean back, I instructed. I said leave, he gritted out, though there was no heat in it, only pain. And I'm ignoring you. Lean back. He hesitated, then slumped back into his chair, his head lolling against the leather. I placed the cold compress over his eyes and forehead. He hissed in a breath, his body going rigid, then slowly relaxing as the cold began to numb the throbbing nerves. Better? I asked. Marginally, he muttered. I moved behind the chair. I hesitated for a fraction of a second, then placed my fingers on his temples. I began to massage, slow, circular motions, finding the tension points in his jaw and neck. He was coiled tight as a spring. "You carry too much tension," I whispered. "You need to breathe." "I can't breathe," he said, his voice sounding drugged by pain. "If I breathe, the wolves get in. The wolves are outside. The gates are locked. You can breathe for 5 minutes." He fell silent, letting me work. The only sound was the rain lashing against the glass and his rhythmic breathing. It was intimate in a way that cleaning the blood hadn't been. This was vulnerability. This was me holding his head in my hands, standing in the dark with a man who could order my death with a phone call. "My father," he said suddenly, his voice low. "He used to get these. Before the Alzheimer's took his mind. It took his peace. He told me it was the price of the crown. The head that wears it. It always hurts. It's a heavy crown." I agreed, moving my thumbs to the base of his skull. "I didn't want it," he confessed. The words hung in the air, heavy and treasonous. "I wanted to be an architect. I wanted to build things, not break them. But Carlo got sick. And my brother was weak. So I took it. You build things," I said. "You built a wall around your father. You built a safe place for him." He reached up, his hand closing over mine, stopping my movements. He pulled my hand down, pressing my palm against his cheek. His skin was burning hot against my cool fingers. He turned his chair, the leather creaking, until he was facing me. The ice pack fell to his lap. His eyes were open now, dark adjustment to the gloom allowing him to see me. They were red-rimmed, heavy with pain, but burning with something else. "You shouldn't be here," he whispered. "You're too bright for this room, Chloe. Too clean." "I'm not clean," I said, my voice shaking slightly. "I'm covered in paint and cheap lotion. And I'm not made of glass, Marco. You don't have to protect me from a headache. It's not the headache I'm protecting you from." He stood up. The movement was sudden, towering over me. The space between us evaporated. I could feel the heat radiating off him. The air in the room grew thin, charged with electricity that had nothing to do with the storm outside. He looked down at me, his gaze dropping to my lips, then back to my eyes. A hunger was there, raw and terrifying. He leaned in, his hand coming up to cup my jaw, his thumb brushing my bottom lip. My breath hitched. I wanted him to kiss me. God help me. I wanted the monster to kiss me. I leaned into his touch, my hands rising to rest on his chest, feeling the steady, heavy thud of his heart. His face came closer. I could smell the peppermint of the tea I had made him, mixed with his own dark scent. Then he froze. He pulled back as if he had been burned. His hand dropped from my face. He stepped back, putting the desk between us again. "Go," he said. His voice was rough, final. "Marco, go to your room, Chloe. Lock the door. And don't come back in here." I stood there for a heartbeat, feeling the rejection like a slap, but I saw his hands clenching into fists at his sides, saw the restraint trembling in his frame. He wasn't rejecting me because he didn't want me. He was rejecting me because he wanted me too much, and he thought he was poison. "The ice will melt," I said quietly, my voice steady despite the turmoil in my chest. "Put a new cloth on it in 20 minutes. I turned and walked out of the study, closing the heavy door behind me. I walked down the long, shadowed hallway back to my room, my lips still tingling from the ghost of a touch that never happened. He thought he was saving me, but as I lay in the dark that night, listening to the thunder, I realized something dangerous. I didn't want to be saved. I wanted to be the one standing in the dark with him, and that realization scared me more than any gun or Albanian hitman ever could. The next morning, the distance was back. Marco was gone before I woke up. But on the kitchen counter, next to the coffee machine, there was a small box. Inside was a set of professional-grade watercolor brushes, sable hair, the kind I had drooled over in the art supply catalog but could never afford. There was no note. There didn't need to be. I ran my thumb over the velvet lining of the box. He had noticed. Amidst the blood, the migraines, and the gang wars, he had noticed what I needed. I looked out the window at the gray, post-storm sky. The game had changed. I wasn't just an employee anymore. And Marco DeLuca wasn't just a boss. We were two people dancing on the edge of a cliff, and the ground was starting to crumble. "Chloe." Carlo's voice drifted from the sunroom. "The light. Come see the light." "Coming, Carlo," I called back. I closed the box of brushes and headed toward the sunroom, tucking the gift and the dangerous affection that came with it deep inside my heart, where no one, especially not the approaching wolves, could see it. But even I knew that secrets, like walls, eventually come crashing down, and the cracks were already starting to show. The box on my bed was the size of a small coffin. It was black velvet, embossed with silver lettering that spelled out the name of a designer I had only ever seen in glossy magazines stolen from the dentist's waiting room. "Open it," Marco said from the doorway. He was leaning against the frame, watching me with that unreadable expression that had become his default setting over the last 3 weeks. He was already dressed for the evening in a tuxedo that fit him like a second skin, the stark black and white emphasizing the brutal sharpness of his features. He looked like a prince from a fairy tale written by the Brothers Grimm. Beautiful, but undeniably dangerous. I reached out and lifted the lid. Layers of tissue paper parted to reveal fabric that shimmered like liquid jewels. It wasn't navy blue. It wasn't black. It was emerald green, a deep, vibrant shade that reminded me of old forests and expensive absinthe. "We are attending the DeLuca Foundation Gala tonight," Marco stated, walking into the room as I stared at the dress. "It is mandatory." I looked up, confusion warring with the sudden spike of anxiety in my chest. "I thought the rule was to keep Carlo inside. You said security was tight because of the Albanians." "The rule has changed," Marco said, his voice dropping an octave. "Rumors are circulating that my father is dead or incapacitated. If the other families believe the DeLuca patriarch is gone, they will strike. They need to see him standing. They need to see him strong. He thinks he's 20 years old half the time, Marco. He tried to eat a tube of paint yesterday." "That is why you are coming," he countered, stopping a few feet from me. The scent of sandalwood and expensive starch wafted off him. "You are his anchor. When he looks at you, he sees clarity. You will guide him. You will keep him calm. And you will make sure he doesn't embarrass the family." I ran my fingers over the silk of the dress. It was cool to the touch. And what am I supposed to be? His nurse in a couture gown? "You are his companion," Marco corrected. "Tonight, you are not the help. You are part of the inner circle, which means you need to look the part." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet pouch. He upended it over the bed. A necklace slid out. A simple, delicate gold chain holding a single teardrop emerald that matched the dress perfectly. "Wear this," he said. "It belonged to my mother." My breath hitched. "Marco, I can't. This is too personal. It's camouflage, Chloe. People know my mother's jewelry. If you wear it, it signals that you are trusted. It keeps the wolves at bay." He checked his watch. "You have an hour. Don't make us late." He turned and walked out before I could argue, leaving me alone with a dress that cost more than my life's earnings, and a necklace that carried the weight of a dead woman's legacy. The ballroom of the Drake Hotel was a sensory assault. Crystal chandeliers the size of compact cars dripped light onto a crowd of Chicago's elite. The air was thick with the scent of lilies, roasting beef, and the metallic tang of old money. I walked on Marco's left, my hand tucked into the crook of his elbow. Carlo was on his right, looking surprisingly cogent in his tuxedo, though he kept patting his pocket to make sure his library card was still there. "Smile," Marco murmured, his lips barely moving. "You look like you're marching to the gallows." "I feel like I am," I whispered back, forcing the corners of my mouth up. "Everyone is staring." "Let them stare. You look magnificent." The compliment was delivered with such flat, factual indifference that it took me a moment to process it. I glanced at our reflection in a gilt-framed mirror as we passed. The emerald dress hugged every curve, the slit in the skirt revealing a scandalous amount of leg with every step. My red hair was cascaded in loose waves over one shoulder. Beside Marco, I didn't look like a waitress from the South Side. I looked like I belonged. And that terrified me more than anything. We navigated the room like sharks in a reef. Marco introduced me to senators, judges, and men whose smiles didn't reach their cold, calculating eyes. I played my part perfectly. I laughed at their unfunny jokes. I gently redirected Carlo when he started asking about the music from the radio, and I kept a death grip on Marco's arm. "Drinks," Carlo announced suddenly, eyeing a passing waiter. "I require a libation." "Sparkling water, Papa," Marco said firmly. "Chloe, get him a water with lime. I need to speak to Councilman Ricci." Marco stepped away, vanishing into a circle of men in gray suits. I was left alone with Carlo near the edge of the dance floor. "I don't like this party, Martha," Carlo whispered, leaning in close to me. "Too many teeth." "I know," I soothed, scanning the room for a server. "We'll get your water, and then find a quiet table." My eyes landed on a waiter moving through the crowd about 20 feet away. He was carrying a large silver tray loaded with champagne flutes. I frowned. Something was wrong. I had spent 4 years waiting tables. I knew the rhythm of service. I knew the server walk. That specific glide you adopt to keep liquids from spilling. This man wasn't gliding. He was marching. His shoulders were tense, hiked up around his ears. And he wasn't looking at the glasses or the guests. His eyes were darting toward the exits, scanning the perimeter, checking the balcony. He passed another waiter, a younger man with the hotel's logo on his vest, and they didn't nod or acknowledge each other. The man with the tray pivoted sharply, heading not toward the thirsty guests, but toward the VIP dais where Marco was currently shaking hands. I looked down at his feet. Waiters wore dress shoes. Cheap, polished, slip-resistant dress shoes. This man was wearing heavy, thick-soled tactical boots. My stomach dropped to the floor. I scanned the room again, my heart hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I saw another one near the kitchen doors. Same stiff posture, same wandering eyes, same boots. And he was holding his serving napkin over his right wrist in a way that looked unnatural, bulky. "Carlo," I said, my voice tight. "We need to go to Marco, now. But the water..." "Forget the water." I grabbed Carlo's arm, ignoring proper etiquette, and steered him aggressively through the crowd. I didn't care if I stepped on toes or spilled drinks. I had to get to Marco. He was standing near a pillar, deep in conversation with a man who looked like a bulldog. When Marco saw me approaching, his brow furrowed. He opened his mouth to reprimand me for interrupting, but the look on my face must have stopped him. I didn't stop until I was right in his personal space. I stood on my tiptoes, pressing my chest against his arm, feigning intimacy so I could whisper in his ear. "The waiters," I hissed. "The one with the champagne near the pillar, and the one by the kitchen. They're fake." Marco went rigid. He didn't look around. He didn't panic. He just placed his hand on the small of my back, his fingers digging into the silk. "Explain," he breathed. "They're wearing tactical boots." I whispered rapidly. "They're not serving anyone. They're moving in a pincer formation toward the dais. And the one by the kitchen, he has something under his napkin. It's too heavy to be a corkscrew." Marco didn't question me. He didn't ask if I was sure. He didn't hesitate. "Ricci," Marco said to the man he was talking to, his voice calm but infused with steel. "Take my father to the car. Use the east exit. Now." Ricci nodded once, grabbing Carlo's elbow. "Come, Don Carlo. Let's get that drink." As soon as they turned, the energy in the room shifted. It was subtle, a vibration in the air. The fake waiter near the pillar locked eyes with Marco. He realized he had been made. The man reached under his tray. "Down!" Marco roared. He tackled me. His arm hooked around my waist, sweeping me off my feet as he threw us both behind the massive marble pillar. Gunfire erupted. It wasn't the pop, pop, pop of movies. It was a deafening, thunderous crack that shattered the air. Glass exploded everywhere. Screams tore through the ballroom, high-pitched and terrified. I hit the floor hard, Marco's heavy body covering mine completely. He was a human shield, pressing me into the cold marble. I could feel the impact of bullets chipping away at the stone inches above our heads. Dust and debris rained down on his tuxedo jacket. "Stay down," he snarled into my ear. He pulled a gun from somewhere inside his jacket. A sleek black weapon that looked terrifyingly at home in his hand. He rolled off me, crouching low. He fired 2 shots around the pillar. 2 distinct thuds followed. "Clear," he said. He grabbed my hand and yanked me up. "Run." We ran. Not toward the exit where the panic was bottlenecking the crowd, but toward a service door concealed in the paneling. Marco kicked it open, and we spilled into a narrow concrete corridor that smelled of garbage and stale smoke. He didn't stop. He dragged me down the hallway, past confused kitchen staff, down a flight of stairs, and into a sub-basement storage room filled with linens. He slammed the heavy metal door shut and threw the deadbolt. Only then did he stop. The silence in the room was sudden and ringing. My ears were buzzing. My heart felt like it was going to explode out of my chest. I was gasping for air, clutching the front of my dress. Marco turned to me. His hair was disheveled, white dust from the pillar coating one side of his face. His eyes were wild, dilated, burning with adrenaline and violence. He crossed the room in 2 strides. He grabbed my face between his hands. His grip was hard, almost painful, but I didn't pull away. I couldn't. "Are you hit?" he demanded, scanning me frantically. "Did they touch you?" "No," I wheezed. "No, I'm okay. Marco, your father. Ricci has him. He's safe." He pressed his forehead against mine, his breathing ragged. "You saw them. How did you see them?" "The shoes," I stammered, my hands coming up to grip his wrists. They didn't walk right. "I told you. I know how waiters walk." He let out a sound that was half laugh, half groan. "You saved us. We would have been standing right there in the open." He pulled back slightly, looking into my eyes. The adrenaline was still coursing through both of us, a live wire connecting our bodies. The fear of death had stripped away the walls, the contracts, the propriety. "You are incredible," he whispered, and then he kissed me. It wasn't a gentle, tentative first kiss. It was a collision. It was desperate, hungry, and fueled by the raw realization that we were both still alive. His mouth crushed against mine, demanding and claiming. My hands tangled in his hair, pulling him closer. I tasted the dust on his skin, the champagne he had sipped earlier, and the dark, intoxicating flavor of danger. He groaned low in his throat, lifting me up. I wrapped my legs around his waist instinctively. He pressed me against the stacks of linens, his body hard and unyielding against mine. For a moment, the world outside didn't exist. There were no Albanian hitmen, no screaming crowds, no dying fathers. There was just Marco, his hands on my skin, his heart beating against mine, consuming me whole. He broke the kiss, gasping, burying his face in the crook of my neck. He bit down gently on the sensitive skin there, making me shiver. "I should not have done that," he growled against my skin. "Then why aren't you stopping?" I whispered, tilting my head back to give him better access. He froze. His hands tightened on my hips for one agonizing second, and then he slowly, reluctantly, set me down. He stepped back, putting distance between us. He ran a hand through his hair, trying to regain his composure, trying to put the mask back on. But I saw the cracks. I saw the way his chest heaved, the way his eyes lingered on my swollen lips. "We need to move," he said, his voice rough. "My security team will be sweeping the building. We need to get you to the safe house." "Marco," I said, reaching out to touch his arm. He flinched, but he didn't pull away. He looked at my hand on his sleeve, then up at my face. "Everything has changed, Chloe," he said grimly. "They didn't just attack a party. They attacked us. You are a target now." "I know," I said. I wasn't shaking anymore. The fear had been burned away by the fire he had ignited in me. "I'm not leaving." He looked at me for a long moment, a mix of pride and terror in his eyes. "I know," he said. "God help us both." He took my hand, not gripping my wrist like a prisoner, but interlacing his fingers with mine. "Stay behind me," he commanded, drawing his gun again. "And don't let go." "Never," I promised. He opened the door, and we stepped back into the darkness, hand in hand, ready to face whatever war was waiting for us on the other side. The silence in the safe house was worse than the screaming at the gala. It was a suffocating, heavy blanket that smothered every room. We had been extracted from the Belmont Hotel 3 hours ago, leaving behind shattered glass and a city in chaos, only to retreat to Marco's fortress on the cliffs overlooking Lake Michigan. I sat in the command center, wrapped in a coarse wool blanket, clutching a mug of coffee that had gone cold an hour ago. My emerald dress, the one that had cost more than my tuition, was ruined, the hem torn and stained with dust from the hotel's sub-basement. She knew. The voice cut through the air like a whip. Ricci, Marco's capo, paced the room like a caged tiger. He was bleeding from a cut on his forehead, and his eyes were fixed on me with undisguised hatred. "Watch your tone," Marco said from the window. He had discarded his ruined tuxedo jacket and rolled up the sleeves of his blood-spattered shirt. He hadn't looked at me since we arrived. "I am watching my tone, boss," Ricci spat. "But look at the facts. We planned the gala security for months. No leaks. Then the waitress shows up. 3 weeks later, the Albanians know our exit routes. And she spots the shooters before my trained men do. I spotted them because your men were looking at jewelry, not shoes," I said, my voice hoarse. "I know what a waiter looks like. Those men moved like soldiers." Ricci slammed his hand on the table. "Convenient. Maybe you spotted them because you knew they were coming. Maybe this was a setup to make you look like a hero." "Enough." Marco turned. The single word killed the noise in the room. He walked to the table and leaned in toward Ricci. "She saved my father. If she were the mole, she would have let them take us on the dais. We were exposed. Or she's playing the long game," Ricci argued, though his voice lost some edge. "Someone inside gave them the schematics. Someone told them we were using the East Wing." "Investigate the staff," Marco ordered. "Check the catering. Check the security detail. But Chloe is off limits." Ricci glared at me one last time before nodding stiffly. "I'll double the guard. But if I find one text message linking her to them..." "Go." Marco dismissed him. Ricci stormed out. We were alone. The silence returned, charged with the electricity of the unfinished conversation from the hotel linen closet. I watched Marco. He looked exhausted, the lines around his eyes deepening. "You should sleep," he said, staring at the map on the wall. "There is a room prepared. I don't want to sleep. I want to know what happens now." He finally looked at me. "Now we go to war. The Albanians struck my family in public. I have to burn them to the ground. And me? Ricci thinks I'm a traitor. Do you?" Marco walked around the table until he stood in front of me. He reached out, his hand hovering near my face before dropping. "If I thought you were a traitor, you would be dead," he stated. "But Ricci is right about one thing. You are a liability." I stiffened. "Excuse me?" "You are a civilian. Tonight was luck. Next time they won't miss. And now they know your face. You are a target, Chloe, which means you stay in the house. You do not leave my sight unless you are in a secure room. So, I'm a prisoner," I said bitterly. "You are protected. There is a difference." Marco leaned down, bracing his hands on the arms of my chair, trapping me. "You wanted in," he whispered, his voice rough. "You got in the car. You kissed me back. This is the life. It isn't romantic. It is blood and paranoia. If you wanted freedom, you should have let me drive away that first night." "I didn't want freedom," I whispered back. "I wanted to matter." Something flickered in his eyes. He pushed himself away. "You matter. That is the problem. Now go to your room." The next 2 days were a blur of confinement. The estate was locked down. Men with rifles patrolled the gardens. I was allowed in 3 places: my bedroom, the library with Carlo, and the kitchen. Marco was a ghost again, coordinating strikes from the West Wing. I focused on Carlo. The gala had shaken him. He was agitated, pacing the library, muttering about spies. "They listen, Martha. he whispered on the second afternoon, clutching my arm. The walls have ears. The chair has ears. It's okay, Carlo, I soothed, guiding him to his leather wingback chair. It's just the wind. No, he insisted, eyes wide. The little bug. It hums. Can't you hear it hum? I paused. Usually, I dismissed his ramblings. But Marco had said the Albanians knew the schematics. Where does it hum, Carlo? He pointed at the armrest. Here. It bites my elbow. I knelt and ran my hand over the smooth leather. Nothing. Then I felt a bump under the lip of the wood. It was plastic. I pulled out my phone and used the flashlight. There, wedged into a small tear in the lining, was a black disc no larger than a quarter. A tiny red light pulsed, a listening device. My blood ran cold. It was active. Carlo wasn't crazy. He heard the high-frequency hum. If this bug was here, in the heart of the library, they heard everything. They knew about the gala because Marco discussed security here. I reached to rip it off, but froze. If I removed it, the signal would cut. They would know. You're right, Carlo, I said loudly, forcing a cheerful tone. The chair squeaks. Let's go get ice cream. Ice cream? Carlo blinked. Strawberry? Yes. Come on. I steered him out of the library, my mind racing. Marco was in the West Wing. I had to tell him without the bug hearing. I walked Carlo to the kitchen. Maria, I said to the cook, Mr. Carlo wants ice cream. Can you sit with him? I need to get something from my room. Of course, dear. I left them and walked into the hallway. As soon as I was out of sight, I took off my heels and ran toward the West Wing. I reached the corridor leading to Marco's office. Going somewhere, Miss Wells? Enzo stepped out of an alcove. He was wearing his chauffeur's uniform. He was a big man, usually bored-looking. Now, he looked alert. Enzo, I said, trying to breathe evenly. I need to see Marco. Carlo is having an episode. The boss is busy, Enzo said, blocking my path. And Carlo is eating ice cream. I checked the kitchen feeds. He took a step toward me. You look nervous. Did you find something you weren't supposed to? He knew. He must have been monitoring the bug. I don't know what you're talking about, I lied, backing away. You're smart, Enzo sneered, dropping the facade. Too smart. Ricci was right about you being trouble. He reached behind his back and pulled a silencer-equipped pistol. Marco will kill you, I whispered. Marco is going to be dead in 5 minutes, Enzo said, checking his watch. The perimeter alarms are disabled. My friends are at the gate. He raised the gun. No, I screamed. I threw my phone at his face. It hit him, making him flinch. I dove to the right just as the gun puffed, a soft thwip. The bullet splintered the paneling where my head had been. Help! Marco! Gun! I screamed, scrambling on the floor. Enzo recovered and leveled the gun again. Goodbye, Waitress. Boom. The front door of the mansion exploded. The shockwave shook the house. Dust rained down. Enzo stumbled, his aim thrown off. The bullet went wide. Alarms blared. Breach! Sector 1! Enzo looked at the door, then at me. He grinned. Cavalry's here. He turned and ran toward the explosion to join the attackers. I scrambled up and ran toward the command center. The door flew open. Marco emerged holding an assault rifle, Ricci behind him. Get back! Marco roared. Get to the panic room. It's Enzo, I screamed. Enzo is the traitor. He planted the bug. He disabled the alarms. Marco froze. The realization hit him. The driver. The man with total access. Ricci, Enzo is hostile. Kill on sight, Marco barked. Where is my father? Kitchen, I gasped. The kitchen is near the breach point, Marco swore. They'll come through the service entrance. He grabbed my arm. Stay behind me. If you see anything that isn't family, scream. We ran into the chaos. The hallway was filling with smoke. Through the haze, I saw men in tactical gear moving with precision. Contact front, Marco yelled, opening fire. The hallway erupted. It was deafening. I stayed glued to Marco's back. We pushed forward, stepping over the body of a guard. We reached the kitchen door. Marco kicked it open. The scene froze my blood. Maria was on the floor. Carlo was standing in the middle of the room, looking confused, and Enzo was behind him, arm around his neck, gun to his temple. 3 Albanian mercenaries stood by the back door. "Drop it, Marco!" Enzo shouted. Marco lowered his rifle slowly. His face was a mask of rage. "Let him go," Marco said calmly. "He's an old man. He's your weakness," Enzo spat. "I told them to kill the wolf, take the cub, or the old dog." Enzo sneered at me. "And you brought the girlfriend, 2 for the price of 1. Let them go and I let you walk," Marco offered. "I'm already walking," Enzo laughed, backing toward the door. "And I'm taking him." Marco was trapped. He couldn't shoot. Enzo was too well covered by Carlo. I looked at the counter near Enzo. There was a can of high-pressure oven cleaner next to the stove Maria had been using. The burner was still lit. I looked at Marco. A microscopic nod. "Enzo!" I screamed. He flinched, glancing at me. I grabbed the can and hurled it at the open flame. Boom! The can exploded in a ball of chemical fire. Enzo jerked back. Marco lunged. He covered the distance instantly, tackling Enzo away from Carlo. The gun went off into the ceiling. "Run, Chloe, get him out!" Marco roared, grappling with Enzo. The mercenaries opened fire. I dove for Carlo, dragging him behind the marble island. "Come on, Carlo," I sobbed, pulling him toward the pantry. "Marco is fighting," Carlo said. "Marco is busy." I shoved him into the pantry. I looked back. Marco was beating Enzo, but the mercenaries were advancing. Marco was exposed. "Marco!" I screamed. He rolled off Enzo, grabbed his rifle and fired. 1 mercenary dropped. Ricci burst in, engaging the second, but the 3rd mercenary had a clear shot at Marco's back. I didn't have a gun. I grabbed the cast iron skillet from the counter. I ran. The mercenary didn't see me. I swung the heavy pan with everything I had. It connected with his helmet. Clang. He stumbled, turning to me with shock. He raised his rifle at my chest. I froze. Bang! His head snapped back. He crumpled. Marco stood there, his rifle smoking. He had shot the man over my shoulder. He looked at me, then at the frying pan. "Get in the pantry!" he roared. I scrambled back, diving in with Carlo. Marco followed, locking the heavy steel door. Silence. We were trapped in a 6x6 room. Marco slid down the door, chest heaving, covered in blood. He looked at me, clutching the pan. He started to laugh. A dark, jagged sound. "A frying pan," he wheezed. "You attacked a hitman with a frying pan." "It was heavy," I defended, shaking. Marco pulled me toward him, pressing his forehead against mine. "You are insane, and you are the only reason I am breathing." I dropped the pan and buried my face in his vest. "Is Enzo dead?" "Not yet," Marco growled. "But he will be." He pulled back, looking at Carlo, who was sitting on a sack of flour eating his ice cream. "We wait for backup," Marco said. "Then I finish this." He touched my face. "And then, I am going to build a wall around you so high not even God can see over it." "I don't want a wall, Marco," I whispered. "I want a weapon." He stared at me, the fire in his eyes burning bright. Slowly he nodded. "Okay," he said. "Okay." The pantry was a coffin of steel and silence, buried in the heart of a burning house. The heavy door had clicked shut, sealing us in a space no larger than a walk-in closet, lined with shelves of imported pasta, canned tomatoes, and sacks of flour. The air was already growing stale, thick with the metallic scent of blood, the sharp tang of gun smoke that clung to Marco's clothes, and the sweet, artificial smell of Carlo's strawberry ice cream. We sat in the dark. The only light came from the thin strip of illumination under the doorframe, flickering wildly as the battle raged in the kitchen outside. Marco slid down the wall until he hit the floor. His legs splayed out in front of him. His chest heaved like a bellows, each breath a ragged gasp that rattled in his throat. He was still gripping the assault rifle, his knuckles white, his finger hovering over the trigger guard. "Check him," Marco rasped, tilting his head toward the corner where I had shoved Carlo. "Is he hit?" I crawled over the cold tile, my knees scraping against the grit of spilled sugar and broken glass that had made it inside with us. "Carlo?" I whispered, my hands trembling as I reached out in the gloom. I found his shoulder. He flinched, then relaxed. He was sitting on a 50-pound bag of rice, his legs pulled up to his chest. The bad man took my spoon. Carlo murmured into the darkness. He sounded small, younger than his years, stripped of the dignity he usually wore like armor. "I know, Carlo. I'm sorry," I said, running my hands over his torso, checking for wetness, for the sticky warmth of blood. His tuxedo jacket was torn, and he was shaking violently, but he seemed whole. "He's okay, Marco, just scared." "Good," Marco breathed. "Good." I turned back to Marco. In the flickering light from under the door, I saw the dark stains spreading across the shoulder of his tactical vest. "You're bleeding," I said, panic spiking in my chest. "Grazed," he dismissed, though his voice was tight with pain. Ricci's shotgun spread. "Friendly fire. It's nothing." "It's not nothing," I insisted, crawling toward him. I reached for the med kit that was mounted on the wall. Marco had told me once that every secure room in the house was stocked. I ripped it open by feel, grabbing a pressure bandage. "Leave it," Marco commanded, catching my wrist. His grip was iron, hot and bloody. "Chloe, stop. We don't have time for first aid." "We're locked in," I argued, trying to pull my hand free. "We have nothing but time until Ricci clears the room, or until Enzo blows the hinges," Marco countered. He pulled me closer, until I was kneeling between his legs, his face inches from mine. The intensity in his eyes burned through the shadows. "Listen to me. The door is reinforced, but it won't hold forever if they have explosives. And Enzo knows where the breach charges are kept." He let go of my wrist and reached behind his back, pulling a combat knife from his belt. He pressed the handle into my palm. It was heavy, the metal cold against my sweating skin. "If that door opens," Marco said, his voice low and devoid of emotion, "and it isn't Ricci, you don't hesitate, you understand?" I looked at the knife, then at him. "Marco, you don't look at me," he growled. "You don't look at my father. You aim for the throat or the groin. You fight dirty. You fight to kill, because if they take you alive, Chloe, what they will do to you to get to me." He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. The darkness behind his eyes told me everything I needed to know about the cruelty of the men outside. "I want a gun," I whispered, gripping the knife until my fingers ached. "I can't give you a gun," he said. "The recoil in this small space would deafen you, and you might hit Carlo. The knife never jams. The knife never runs out of ammo." Thud. The door shook violently. Dust rained down from the shelves, coating us in a fine white powder. Carlo whimpered in the corner. "Marco!" Enzo's voice came through the steel, muffled but distinct. "Open up. It's getting hot out here." Marco didn't answer. He raised his rifle, aiming it squarely at the center of the door. "Come on, boss," Enzo shouted, and I heard the manic edge in his voice. The desperation. "The Albanians are pulling back. They left me. Let me in and we can talk. I have intel. I know who paid for the hit." Marco stayed silent. His breathing slowed, becoming rhythmic, controlled. He was a statue of violence waiting to be animated. "Don't listen to him," I whispered. "I'm not," Marco murmured. "I'm counting his rounds. He fired 12 shots in the kitchen. He has 3 left in that clip." Thud. Thud. "Open the goddamn door!" Enzo screamed, kicking the steel. "I have the detonator, Marco. I'll bring the whole ceiling down on us." "He's lying," Marco said to me, though his eyes never left the door. "If he had charges, he would have used them already. He's scared. He's trapped." Suddenly the gunfire outside intensified. It wasn't the sporadic pop of pistols anymore. It was the heavy, rhythmic thrum of automatic weapons, a different caliber. "Ricci," Marco said, a grim smile touching his lips. We heard screaming, not the angry shouts of soldiers but the terrified cries of men who realized they were no longer the hunters. The sound of boots stomping on tile, the wet, sickening crunch of impact. "Clear left," a voice roared. "Sector 4 clear." "Kitchen! Suppressing fire! It was Ricci. Marco! Ricci's voice boomed, close now, right outside the door. Status! Marco didn't lower the rifle. Code black, he shouted back. Confirm secure. Sector secure, Ricci yelled. Hostiles neutralized. 1 prisoner secured. Marco let out a breath that seemed to deflate his entire body. He lowered the weapon, resting his forehead against the barrel for a split second. Open it, Marco commanded. The lock tumbled. The heavy bolts retracted with a groan of metal on metal. The door swung open. The light was blinding. I raised my hand to shield my eyes, blinking against the sudden brightness. The kitchen was a slaughterhouse. The pristine white marble island was chipped and pockmarked with bullet holes. The cabinets were shattered. The air was thick with smoke and the smell of cordite. Bodies lay on the floor. The mercenaries in their tactical gear, twisted in unnatural angles. And in the center of the room, on his knees, was Enzo. He was a wreck. His face was swollen, blood streaming from a broken nose. His hands were zip-tied behind his back. 2 of Marco's security guards stood over him, guns pressed to the back of his head. Enzo looked up as we emerged from the pantry. His eyes found Marco. And for the first time, I saw true terror. Marco stepped out first. He looked like a demon rising from the pit. He was covered in white flour dust and red blood. He limped slightly, favoring his left leg, but his presence filled the room, sucking the oxygen out of the air. I followed him, still clutching the knife. I went straight to the counter, grabbing a bottle of water, my hands shaking so hard I could barely unscrew the cap. I needed to wash the taste of fear out of my mouth. Marco walked over to Enzo. He didn't rush. He moved with a terrifying, deliberate slowness. Marco, Enzo pleaded, blood bubbling on his lips. Marco, listen. They threatened my sister. They said they would kill her kids. I had no choice. Marco stopped 2 feet away. He looked down at the man who had driven his car for 10 years. The man who had eaten Sunday dinner at his table. Everyone has a choice, Enzo, Marco said softly. I can give you names, Enzo stammered, tears cutting tracks through the grime on his face. The Albanian boss, Cristo. He's in the warehouse by the docks. I can take you to him. Just don't kill me. Please. For the old times. Marco tilted his head, considering. He looked at Ricci. Is the sister safe? Marco asked. Ricci nodded grimly. We checked. She's in Florida. Safe. No threats detected. He did it for money, boss. We found the transfer. $2 million in an offshore account. Enzo flinched. The lie hung in the air, exposed and rotting. Marco looked back at Enzo. The sadness in Marco's eyes vanished, replaced by a cold, absolute void. You sold my father for money, Marco said. It wasn't a question. Marco, please. You put a gun to his head, Marco continued, his voice rising, cracking with fury. You used him as a shield. You let strangers into my home to slaughter my family. Marco reached out to the guard on the left. Give me your sidearm. The guard handed over his pistol without hesitation. Enzo started to scream. No, Marco, don't! I'm family, Marco didn't blink. He didn't hesitate. He raised the gun and fired once. Bang! The sound was final. Enzo slumped forward, silence reclaiming the room. I stood by the counter, the water bottle halfway to my mouth. I didn't look away. I watched the life leave Enzo's body. I watched the pool of blood expanding on the expensive tile. I should have been horrified. I should have screamed. The old Chloe, the waitress who worried about tips and textbooks, would have fainted, but that Chloe was gone. She had died the moment she picked up a frying pan and attacked a hitman. I looked at Marco. He stood over the body for a long moment, his chest heaving. Then he engaged the safety on the gun and handed it back to the guard. He turned to me. He saw me watching him. He saw the knife still gripped in my hand. He saw the lack of judgment in my eyes. He walked toward me. The guards parted, giving him a wide berth. He stopped in front of me, ignoring the carnage around us. He reached out and gently pried the knife from my fingers. He placed it on the counter. Are you hurt? He asked, his voice rough, returning to that protective rumble. I'm okay, I whispered. Just bruises. He nodded. He looked over my shoulder at the pantry, where Ricci was helping a confused but unharmed Carlo to his feet. Get the car, Marco ordered Ricci. The armored transport. We're leaving. Where to, boss? Ricci asked. The safe house is compromised. The airstrip, Marco said. We're going to the villa in Tuscany. Tonight. He turned back to me. Can you walk? My legs felt like jelly. The adrenaline crash was hitting me hard. I think so. Don't think, Marco said. He bent down and swept me up into his arms. Marco, your shoulder, I protested, trying to hold my weight so I wouldn't press against his wound. I don't feel it, he said. He carried me out of the kitchen, stepping over the debris, stepping over the past. He carried me through the ruined hallway, out the front door where the cold night air hit us like a slap. The driveway was filled with more cars. Police sirens wailed in the distance, getting closer. The cops are coming, I murmured, resting my head against his good shoulder. Let them come, Marco said, walking toward the waiting armored truck. My lawyers will handle them. By the time they get a warrant, we will be over the Atlantic. He placed me in the back of the truck, wrapping a thick blanket around me. He sat down next to me, signaling for Ricci to load Carlo. As the heavy doors slammed shut, sealing us in once again, Marco took my hand. His fingers were stained with blood. His, Enzo's, mine. He brought my hand to his lips, kissing the knuckles. You asked for a weapon, he said quietly, his dark eyes locking onto mine. I did. You are the weapon, Chloe, he said, a strange mix of awe and fear in his voice. I thought I was bringing a lamb into the wolf's den. But I brought a lioness. I looked at our joined hands. The blood didn't scare me anymore. It was just a color. Teach me, I said. When we get to Italy, teach me how to shoot. Teach me how to fight. I never want to feel helpless again. Marco squeezed my hand. I will teach you everything. And then, we will come back. And we will burn the rest of them down together. The engine roared to life. We moved forward, leaving the burning house behind, heading toward a new world, a world where I wasn't just a survivor. I was a partner, and God help anyone who tried to hurt us now. The sun in Tuscany was different from the sun in Chicago. It didn't struggle to pierce through smog or reflect harshly off steel skyscrapers. Here, it was heavy, golden, and relentless, baking the ancient stone of the villa and drawing out the scent of rosemary and dry earth. We had been here for 2 weeks, 14 days of silence, healing, and preparation. The villa sat atop a hill surrounded by miles of olive groves and vineyards. It was beautiful, a postcard fantasy of Italian life. But I knew better. I knew that the perimeter was lined with motion sensors. I knew that the gardeners tending the cypress trees carried semi-automatic weapons under their work clothes. And I knew that the man pacing the terrace above me was not on vacation. I sat on a stone bench near the fountain, stripping the magazine from a Glock 19. My hands, once rough from dishwater and sanitizer, were now calloused in different places. The pad of my index finger was hard. The skin between my thumb and forefinger was toughened from the recoil. Faster! Marco's voice drifted down from the balcony. I didn't look up. I slammed the magazine back in, racked the slide, and leveled the weapon at the paper target tacked to an olive tree 20 yards away. Crack, crack, crack. 3 holes appeared in the center mass of the silhouette. Tight grouping. Lethal. Better, he said, descending the stone stairs. But you're still anticipating the recoil. You're dipping the barrel. Marco walked into the sunlight. He looked healthier than he had when we dragged ourselves onto the private jet in Chicago. The gray pallor was gone, replaced by a deep tan. But he still favored his left shoulder, where the bullet had grazed him. He wore a loose linen shirt, unbuttoned at the top, revealing the fresh, angry pink scar that marred his skin. A permanent reminder of the kitchen, the pantry, and the price of survival. He stopped behind me, his chest pressing lightly against my back. He reached around, his large hands covering mine on the grip of the gun. The heat of him was distracting, a gravitational pull that I had stopped trying to resist. Relax your shoulders, he murmured against my ear. You're tense. If you're tense, you miss. And if you miss, I die. I finished for him. We die, he corrected. He adjusted my grip, his fingers rough and warm. Feel the weapon. It's not a tool separate from you. It's an extension of your arm. Point it like you would point your finger. I exhaled, letting my body melt back into his. For a moment, we just stood there, wrapped in the violent intimacy of the lesson. This had become our routine. Mornings were for strategy. Marco on encrypted calls with Ricci back in Chicago, plotting the reclamation of his empire. Afternoons were for me. He was building the weapon he promised. Again, he commanded, stepping back. I fired until the slide locked back. Empty. Good, he said. Now reload. Blindfolded. I turned to him. You're kidding. Enzo attacked us in the dark, Marco said, his face hardening. The power was cut. Smoke filled the hallway. If you can't manipulate your weapon by feel, you're dead in a low-light environment. Close your eyes. I closed my eyes. I fumbled for the fresh magazine on the bench. The metal was hot from the sun. I found the release, dropped the empty mag, and guided the new one in. It snagged. I cursed softly, adjusted the angle, and slammed it home. I racked the slide. Time? I asked, opening my eyes. 4 seconds, Marco said, checking his watch. Too slow. Ideally, it should be under 2, but it's an improvement. He took the gun from me, engaged the safety, and placed it on the bench. Then he looked at me. Really looked at me. You're tired, he observed. I'm fine. You've been drilling for 4 hours, Chloe. Your hands are shaking. My hands are shaking because I'm angry, I said, wiping sweat from my forehead. Ricci called this morning. I heard you shouting. Marco sighed, running a hand through his dark hair. The movement tugged at his wound, and he winced slightly. Ricci is holding the line, but barely. The Albanians have moved into the Southside territories. They're burning businesses that pay us protection. They're trying to starve us out. Then why are we still here? I demanded. Carlo is safe. He's happy with the nurses you hired. We should be going back. We go back when we are ready, Marco said sharply. Not a moment before. I will not bring you back into a war zone until I know you can survive it. I survived the kitchen, I countered, stepping closer to him. I survived the pantry. You got lucky, he growled. Luck runs out. Skill doesn't. He turned and walked toward the edge of the terrace, looking out over the rolling hills. I followed him. The distance between us, usually filled with training commands or tactical discussions, felt different today, heavier. You're afraid, I said softly. He didn't turn. A leader isn't allowed to be afraid. I'm not talking to the leader. I'm talking to Marco. He gripped the stone railing until his knuckles turned white. I almost lost you. In that hallway. When I saw Enzo raise the gun. My heart didn't just stop, Chloe. It shattered. I have spent my life fearing nothing. I buried my mother. I watched my father fade away. I thought I was immune to loss because I had nothing left to lose. He turned to face me, his eyes dark pools of torment. Then you got in my car, he whispered. And suddenly, I have everything to lose. My breath caught in my throat. The raw vulnerability in his voice was more disarming than any weapon he could have handed me. You won't lose me, I promised. I'm not going anywhere. I'm right here. For now, he said. But Chicago. Chicago is a meat grinder. Once we go back, this peace ends. The nights on the terrace, the quiet, it all ends. I don't care about the peace, I said, taking his hand. I ran my thumb over the gold signet ring he wore. I care about the man standing next to me. I told you, Marco. I want a weapon, but I also want a partner. You're not fighting alone anymore. He looked down at our joined hands. He pulled me closer, his resistance breaking. You are dangerous, he murmured, his other hand coming up to cut my jaw. More dangerous than the Albanians. They can only kill me. You can destroy me. Then let me, I whispered. He kissed me. It wasn't like the kiss in the hotel, fueled by adrenaline and terror. This was slow, deliberate. It tasted of the sun and the wine we had shared at lunch. It was a claiming, a silent promise made on a Tuscan hilltop. He lifted me up. sitting me on the edge of the stone railing. The drop behind me was 50 feet, but I felt safer in his arms than I had ever felt on solid ground. His hands roamed over my body, memorizing the curves, the muscles I had built over the last 2 weeks. "I want you," he groaned against my neck. "God help me, I have wanted you since the moment you stood in the rain and yelled at my men." "Then take me," I said, wrapping my legs around his waist. "Stop protecting me, Marco. Just for tonight. Be with me." He pulled back, searching my eyes for any sign of hesitation. Finding none, he nodded. "Tonight," he agreed. "But be sure, Chloe, once we cross this line, there is no going back. You are mine. In Chicago, in Italy, in hell. Mine. I was yours before I even knew your name," I confessed. He picked me up effortlessly and carried me inside. The bedroom was cool, the heavy shutters blocking out the afternoon heat. The sheets were white linen, crisp and clean. Marco undressed me with a reverence that made my knees weak. He treated my body like a holy relic, tracing the fading bruise on my arm where I had hit the floor in the pantry, kissing the scar on my knee from childhood. When he finally took off his shirt, I reached out to touch the bandage on his shoulder. "Does it hurt?" I asked. "Not anymore," he rasped. He lowered himself over me, his weight a heavy, comforting blanket. The world outside ceased to exist. There were no Albanians, no FBI, no dying fathers. There was only the friction of skin on skin, the ragged sound of our breathing, and the overwhelming realization that I had found my home in the arms of a monster who treated me like a queen. We moved together with a desperate rhythm, trying to fuse our souls together before the war could tear us apart. When he finally claimed me, I cried out, not in pain, but in release. It was an exorcism of all the fear, all the doubt. Afterward, we lay tangled in the sheets, the room bathed in the orange glow of the setting sun. I rested my head on his chest, listening to the slow, steady thud of his heart. "We have to go back," I said into the silence. Marco tightened his arm around me. "I know. When?" "Ricci says they are planning a final push on Sunday. The feast of San Gennaro. They think we are weak. They think the De Luca family is headless. So we go back for the feast," I said, tracing the line of his jaw. "Yes," Marco said, his voice hardening, the dawn returning to the surface. "We go back. And we remind them why they used to be afraid of the dark." He sat up, the sheet falling to his waist. He looked at me, his expression serious. "There is one more thing," he said, "before we leave." "What?" He reached into the drawer of the bedside table. He pulled out a small black velvet box. My heart skipped a beat. "I didn't buy this," he said, opening it. "My grandfather had it made for my grandmother when he founded the family in America. It has been in a vault for 40 years. Inside sat a ring. It wasn't a delicate modern diamond. It was a massive ruby, dark as blood, surrounded by jagged diamonds that looked like teeth. It was beautiful, ancient, and terrifying. "It's a war ring," Marco explained. "My grandmother wore it during the turf wars of the 80s. She was known as the Iron Matron. She didn't just organize the dinners. She organized the logistics. She was his partner in every sense." He took the ring out of the box. "I am not asking you to be a housewife, Chloe. I am not asking you to sit at home and wait for me to come back alive. I am asking you to stand beside me, to be the queen on the chessboard, to make the hard calls when I cannot." He took my left hand. "Will you take this life?" he asked. "With all its blood and all its sins?" I looked at the ring. It was heavy. It was a shackle, a promise, and a weapon all in one. I thought about my old life. The diner, the eviction notices, the loneliness. Then I looked at Marco, the man who had saved me, and whom I had saved in return. "Put it on," I said. He slid the ring onto my finger. It fit perfectly. The ruby caught the dying light, glowing like a burning coal. "Now," Marco said, kissing the ring. "We are ready." The flight back to Chicago was silent. The private jet cut through the night sky like a knife. I sat across from Marco, polishing the Glock he had given me. My own personal weapon now, engraved with my initials. I wasn't wearing my Waitress uniform. I was wearing a black tailored suit that Marco had ordered from Milan. My hair was slicked back. The ruby ring weighed heavy on my hand. Carlo was asleep in the back cabin with his nurse. He was safe. But we were flying into the fire. Ricci is meeting us at the private hangar, Marco said, looking up from his tablet. He has the car ready. The Albanians are gathered at the warehouse district. They are celebrating. They think they have won. They're wrong, I said, snapping the slide of my gun forward. Marco smiled. It was a dark, wolfish smile that promised violence. Yes, he agreed. They are. I looked out the window at the lights of Chicago appearing on the horizon. It looked different from up here. It didn't look like a place of struggle anymore. It looked like a kingdom waiting to be reclaimed. I wasn't Chloe Wells, the poor girl who helped an old man in the rain. Not anymore. I was Chloe DeLuca, and I was coming home to take out the trash. Are you ready? Marco asked as the landing gear deployed with a mechanical thud. I looked at him, feeling the cold steel of the gun against my hip and the warmth of his ring on my finger. Let's go to work, I said. The plane touched down, the tires screeching against the tarmac. We were back, and this time, we weren't running. We were hunting. Chicago in the winter was a beast of a different nature than the rain-soaked city I had known in the fall. The rain washed things away, but the snow buried them. It covered the grime, the blood, and the secrets under a blanket of pristine, blinding white. I stood by the floor-to-ceiling window of the master bedroom suite, watching the flakes drift down onto the estate grounds. The landscape was unrecognizable from the night I had first arrived with my battered suitcase and my fear. The gardens were dormant, the statues capped in white, and the new perimeter fence, 12 feet of wrought iron and hidden sensors, was almost invisible against the gray sky. 3 months. It had been 3 months since we returned from Tuscany, 3 months of learning how to breathe without waiting for the next explosion, of waking up to the sound of birds instead of gunfire, instead of the crunch of boots in gravel. 3 months of Carlo's slow, stubborn recovery and of me finally finishing assignments in the library I used to only dust, my laptop balanced between medical charts and security reports. 3 months since the night that became known in the underworld whispers as the Red Sunday. I looked down at my hand resting on the cold glass. The ruby ring, Marco's grandmother's war ring, still sat on my finger, heavy and unyielding, but next to it, on the same finger, sat a simple band of platinum. A wedding ring. The door behind me opened. I didn't flinch. I didn't reach for the gun strapped to my thigh under my silk robe. I knew the cadence of those footsteps. I knew the weight of them. You're up early, Marco said. His arms came around me from behind, wrapping me in heat and the scent of sandalwood. He kissed the curve of my neck, his stubble grazing my skin. I couldn't sleep, I admitted, leaning back into him. The silence is loud today. That's because the war is over, Chloe, he murmured. You're still waiting for the next bomb to drop, but there are no more bombs. We used them all. He was right. The return to Chicago had been brutal, swift, and absolute. We hadn't hidden. We hadn't negotiated. Marco, backed by Ricci and the Loyalists, had descended on the Albanian faction with the fury of a god scorned. I hadn't stayed in the car. I hadn't been on the front lines. Marco drew the line there, but I had been in the command center, monitoring the feeds, coordinating the extraction teams. I had earned my place at the table not just as the Don's wife, but as his strategist. Christo, the Albanian leader, was gone. His warehouses were ours. The streets were quiet. Is Ricci coming over today? I asked, turning in his arms to face him. Marco looked rested. The dark circles that had haunted him for months were gone. The wound on his shoulder had healed into a silver scar that matched the others on his body. Ricci is handling the port shipment, Marco said, brushing a stray hair from my forehead. Today is not a work day. Today is for us, and for Carlo. My chest tightened slightly. How is he? Lucid, Marco said, a shadow passing over his eyes. The doctor says these moments will become rarer. We should go down. I nodded. I went to the dressing room, a space larger than my entire old apartment, and pulled on a thick wool sweater and trousers. I swapped my silk slippers for heavy boots. I didn't dress like a waitress anymore. I dressed like a woman who could walk through a riot without getting a scratch. We went downstairs together. The house felt different now. The tension that used to vibrate in the walls was gone, replaced by a quiet, disciplined efficiency. The guards nodded respectfully as we passed. They didn't look at me with suspicion anymore. They looked at me with something bordering on reverence. They knew about the pantry. They knew about the frying pan. They knew I was the one who kept their boss sane. We found Carlo in the sunroom, the only part of the house that felt like spring. He was sitting in his wheelchair, a blanket over his lap, watching the snow fall. "Papa," Marco said softly. Carlo turned. His eyes, usually cloudy with confusion, were startlingly clear today. It was the terminal lucidity the doctors had warned us about. A final burst of clarity before the final decline. "Marco," Carlo said, his voice weak but steady. "You're late. The light is changing. I know, Papa. I'm sorry." Carlo looked past Marco and fixed his eyes on me. For months he had called me Martha. He had confused me with his dead wife, projecting his memories onto my red hair and my voice. "Come here, girl," he commanded. I walked over and knelt beside his chair. I took his hand. It felt fragile, like dry parchment. "You are not Martha," he said. My heart stopped. I looked at Marco, then back at Carlo. "No," I whispered. "I'm not." Martha hated the cold. Carlo continued, his gaze drifting to the window. "She would never have stood in the rain. She would never have fought in a kitchen." He looked back at me, squeezing my hand with surprising strength. "You are the one from the storm," he said. "The one with the coat." "Chloe." He knew my name. Tears pricked my eyes. "Yes, Carlo. I'm Chloe. You saved me," he said simply. "And you saved him." He gestured vaguely at Marco. "He was drowning, you know. After his mother died. He was drowning in the blood. You pulled him out. He pulled me out too," I said, my voice trembling. Carlo smiled. It was a genuine, warm smile that lit up his face. "Good. The house needs a mother. The boys need a mother. It is a hard life, Chloe. A heavy life. But you have strong shoulders." He reached out and patted my cheek. "Take care of the lions," he whispered, his eyes starting to drift again, the fog rolling back in. "And tell the cook. Tell her I want the strawberry ice cream. The good kind." "I will," I promised, a tear escaping and tracking down my cheek. "I'll get it right now." Carlo closed his eyes, his breathing evening out as he slipped back into his dreams. Marco stepped forward and placed a hand on his father's shoulder, then on mine. We stayed there for a long time, watching the old man sleep, silently acknowledging the torch that had just been passed. Carlo had given us his blessing. He had recognized the new order. That afternoon, I found myself in the library, not hiding, but working. I had finished my degree online 2 weeks ago. The diploma was framed on the wall next to a Caravaggio, but my real work was on the desk in front of me. Blueprints. Not for a bank heist or a security grid, but for a community center in the South Side. The neighborhood I had lived in, the neighborhood that had tried to crush me, was now under DeLuca protection, and I was going to rebuild it. "You're frowning," Marco said, walking in with 2 glasses of wine. "You only frown when you're thinking about plumbing budgets." "The contractor is trying to overcharge us for the copper piping," I said, taking the glass he offered. "He thinks because it's a charity project he can pad the invoice. He doesn't know who he's dealing with." Marco chuckled, sitting on the edge of the desk. "He thinks he's dealing with a philanthropist. He doesn't know he's dealing with the woman who kneecapped a mercenary in Tuscany. I didn't kneecap him. I shot him in the thigh. It was a warning. Remind me never to make you angry," Marco teased, leaning down to kiss me. I pulled back slightly, looking at him. "Are you happy, Marco?" The question took him off guard. He swirled the wine in his glass, looking at the deep red liquid. "Happy is a strange word for men like me," he said thoughtfully. "I am content. I am safe, and for the first time in my life, I am not alone in the dark. That is more than I ever expected to have. And the business? The business is stable. The other families respect the boundaries. They know what happened to the Albanians. Fear is a powerful peacekeeper. And respect," I added, They respect you. They respect us. They fear you, Marco corrected with a grin. The rumors about you are getting out of hand. I heard one yesterday that says you keep a collection of knives in your garter belt. I smirked, crossing my legs. Maybe I do. Marco's eyes darkened, the playful mood shifting instantly to something more primal. He set his glass down. Show me. Later, I said, pushing him away playfully. I have to finish this budget. And we have the dinner tonight. The dinner? It was our first official hosting since the wedding. The heads of the 5 families were coming to the estate. It was a declaration of victory, a show of strength. You're nervous, Marco noted. I'm not nervous. I'm preparing. There's a difference. You don't need to prepare, Marco said. You just need to sit at the head of the table and look at them. That's enough. The dining room was a masterpiece of candlelight and crystal. The table was set for 20. The men who sat around it were the architects of Chicago's criminal underworld. They were old, scarred, and dangerous. And they were all standing. They were waiting for us. Marco and I walked in together. I wore a gown of deep crimson velvet, high-necked and long-sleeved, but fitted to show the strength I had built in the gym. My hair was up, revealing the diamond earrings Marco had given me for graduation, but the only jewelry that mattered was the ruby on my finger. Gentlemen, Marco said, his voice filling the room. Thank you for coming. Don DeLuca. An old man at the end of the table, Don Moretti, nodded respectfully. Then he turned his gaze to me. And Donna DeLuca. It is an honor. I looked at Moretti. I knew his file. I knew he had doubted Marco's leadership 6 months ago. The honor is ours, Don Moretti, I said, my voice steady and cool. I trust your journey from the north side was smooth. I heard there was construction. Moretti blinked. The construction was a code word for a police sting operation that we had tipped him off about anonymously. It was a power move. I was telling him. We saved you. We know everything. Very smooth, thank you, Moretti said, bowing his head slightly. Marco pulled out my chair at the head of the table, opposite him. I sat. The men sat. Dinner was served. The conversation flowed, touching on territories, shipments, and the new truce. I didn't just listen. I spoke. I offered opinions on logistics. I corrected a misconception about the union contracts. I saw the way they looked at Marco. They weren't looking at him with pity for having a meddling wife. They were looking at him with envy. They realized what he had found, a partner who doubled his strength. As the espresso was served, Marco tapped his spoon against his glass. The room fell silent. A toast, Marco said, standing up. To family. To family, the men echoed. Marco looked down the length of the table at me. He raised his glass. And to the storm, he added softly. I smiled, raising my glass. To the storm. Later that night, after the cars had driven away and the house was quiet again, we walked out into the garden. The snow had stopped, and the moon was high and bright, reflecting off the white drifts. It was freezing, but I didn't feel the cold. I was wearing Marco's coat over my shoulders, just like that first night. We walked to the edge of the property, looking out over the city lights in the distance. Do you remember what you said to me? I asked. In the car. When you told me to get in. I remember every word, Marco said. I asked you why you stopped. And I said because he was scared. I turned to him. I reached up and straightened his collar. You were scared too, Marco. Underneath all the armor. You were terrified of being alone. I was, he admitted. But you fixed that. He pulled me into his arms. We stood there in the snow, the two of us against the world. I used to hate the rain, I whispered. I used to hate the cold. It reminded me of being poor, of being invisible. And now it reminds me of the moment my life started. I looked down at the snow covering my boots. They weren't canvas sneakers with holes in them. They were leather. Solid. Warm. I have a surprise for you, Marco said suddenly. Another weapon? I teased. Better. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small folded piece of paper. It looked old, wrinkled. He handed it to me. I unfolded it carefully. It was a receipt from a diner. The Greasy Spoon. Dated November 12th. The timestamp was 11:42 p.m. It was the receipt from the last table I ever served, the one I had walked away from to find Carlo. How? I stared at him. How do you have this? I went back, Marco said. That first week, after I brought you to the house. I went back to the diner. I bought the place. I fired the manager who treated you like trash. And I found this in the trash can where you threw your apron. I looked at the receipt. It was a meaningless scrap of paper to anyone else. But to me, it was the line in the sand, the moment before everything changed. Why did you keep it? I asked, my voice thick with emotion. To remind me, Marco said, pulling me closer. To remind me that miracles happen in the most wretched places, and that sometimes the best thing a man can do is open a door and say, "Get in." I laughed, a sound of pure joy that echoed in the cold night air. Take me home, Marco, I said. He smiled, that rare, genuine smile that he saved only for me. You are home, Chloe. He kissed me, and the world faded away. There was no Mafia, no danger, no past. There was only the snow, the silence, and the man who had taken my hand in the rain and never let go. We walked back toward the house, our footprints mingling in the snow, leaving a trail that led straight to the front door. The lions at the gate watched us pass, silent guardians of the life we had built. I touched the ring on my finger. I touched the gun at my hip. I looked at the man by my side. I was ready for whatever came next. The future was unwritten, but for the first time in my life, I wasn't afraid to pick up the pen. The waitress was gone. The queen had risen. And long live the queen.